Why it sucked to be a Napoleonic soldier. You wake up in a ditch. Not metaphorically, literally. A frozen ditch in what might be Prussia, or possibly Austria, or maybe just the middle of nowhere while Napoleon decides the fate of Europe over breakfast. The ground beneath you is harder than yesterday's bread, which is saying something, considering yesterday's bread could have been used to build fortifications. Your uniform, once the pride of revolutionary France, now resembles a collection of patches held together by pure stubbornness and the occasional prayer to whatever saint protects men who haven't bathed in 3 months. The first thing you notice, even before your eyes fully open, is the smell. It's not just unwashed bodies, though there are plenty of those. It's the particular cocktail of gunpowder residue, rotting leather, infected wounds, and whatever counts as food in an army that moves faster than its supply lines. Someone nearby is coughing up what sounds like his entire respiratory system. Another man is mumbling in his sleep, probably reliving the last battle. Or maybe he's just practicing his final words. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Your feet are the first to remind you why being a Napoleonic soldier is essentially a full-time job and suffering. They're wet, which is their default state. They're also numb, which would be a mercy if it weren't for the occasional sharp pain that suggests frostbite is making itself at home in your toes. Your boots, assuming they're still attached and haven't been stolen in the night, are more suggestion than footwear. The sole of your left boot gave up somewhere near Vienna, and you've been walking on improvised leather patches held together with hope and whatever string you could salvage from dead horses. The reveille sounds. Not a proper bugle, mind you, but whatever instrument survived yesterday's march. It might be a dented horn, or possibly just someone screaming in B-flat. Either way, it means time to move. You drag yourself upright, a process that involves more groaning than should be legally possible, and immediately regret every decision that led you to this moment. Your back sounds like kindling snapping when you straighten it. Your knees make promises they can't keep. And your stomach reminds you that dinner last night was whatever you could scavenge from the battlefield, which may or may not have included actual food. Around you, the Grande Armée stirs. That's what they call it anyway. Grand, as if there's something majestic about 200,000 men in various states of decay trudging across Europe in search of glory and possibly a decent meal. The reality is more like a massive, mobile disaster. Men emerge from ditches, haystacks, and abandoned buildings like zombies in fancy uniforms. Some are missing significant portions of their equipment. Others are missing significant portions of themselves. Everyone is missing their sense of humor, which died somewhere around the third river crossing when the pontoon bridge collapsed and took half the artillery with it. Your sergeant, a man whose face suggests he's been personally insulted by every country in Europe, starts barking orders. He's probably from some provincial town you've never heard of, but he's got the lung capacity of a cathedral organ and the temper of a wet cat. His job is to turn you and your fellow sufferers into something resembling a fighting force. Your job is to pretend you understand what he's saying, while secretly wondering if desertion is really such a terrible idea. The first order of business is breakfast, a term used very loosely here. You queue up with your tin cup, which doubles as a bowl, plate, and occasionally a weapon when things get desperate. The cook, a man whose relationship with food safety laws is purely theoretical, ladles something into your cup that might charitably be called soup. It's warm, which is its only redeeming quality. The color suggests it was made from whatever was swept up off the ground, possibly including the ground itself. You taste it. It tastes like regret with hints of sawdust. You eat it anyway, because this might be the only meal you get today, and you've learned not to be picky about survival. The bread, when you can get it, is a marvel of engineering. It's hard enough to stop musket balls, which some soldiers have actually tested. The crusts could be used as building materials. The inside, if you can get to it, has the texture of wet cardboard and the flavor of disappointment. You dip it in your soup-like substance, not to improve either of them, but because eating them separately would require more jaw strength than you currently possess. Coffee, when available, is made from whatever can be roasted and ground. Sometimes it's actual coffee beans. Sometimes it's acorns. Sometimes it's just optimism and hot water. You drink it anyway, because warmth is warmth, and caffeine is caffeine, even if it's mostly imaginary. After breakfast, if you can call it that, comes the daily inspection. Your sergeant walks down the line, examining each man like a horse dealer evaluating livestock. He's looking for signs of illness, injury, or the kind of despair that leads to mass desertion. He finds all three regularly. The sick are sent to the rear, where they'll either recover or die quietly, where they won't affect morale. The wounded are patched up with whatever passes for medical supplies, which is usually just more of the same strips of cloth that have been doing duty as bandages, boot repairs, and occasionally food wrapping. Your uniform gets special attention. It's supposed to be blue, or at least it was blue once. Now it's more of a faded gray-brown that suggests you've been living in it for months, which you have. The brass buttons, the few that remain, are tarnished beyond recognition. Your white crossbelts, which once made you feel like a proper soldier, now look like they've been used to strain soup. Your pack, hanging off your shoulders like a malignant growth, contains everything you own in the world, which isn't much. A spare shirt, if you're lucky. Some ammunition, if you're luckier. A letter from home, if you're brave enough to keep hoping someone remembers you exist. The inspection reveals the usual problems. Half the men are missing essential pieces of equipment. Quarter of them are clearly sick. Another quarter are questioning their life choices with the kind of intensity that suggests they're planning something stupid. The sergeant makes notes, curses in several languages, and threatens punishments that everyone knows he doesn't have the authority to carry out. It's all theater, really. You're all stuck here together, and everyone knows it. Then comes the marching. Oh, the marching. If you thought medieval soldiers had it rough walking to battle, you haven't experienced the sheer, relentless misery of a Napoleonic march. The Grande Armée moves like a great, lumbering beast across the countryside, consuming everything in its path and leaving destruction in its wake. You are one tiny, insignificant part of this beast, and your job is to keep walking until you drop, and then keep walking anyway. The roads, when there are roads, are rivers of mud mixed with horse manure, broken equipment, and the occasional corpse. When there aren't roads, you make your own, which involves trampling through fields, forests, and whatever else stands between you and your destination. Your boots squelch with every step. The mud sucks at your feet like it's trying to claim you for the earth. Men slip and fall constantly, and the ones behind them have to choose between helping and maintaining the pace. They usually choose the pace. The weight of your pack becomes a personal enemy. It starts as an annoyance, progresses to genuine pain, and eventually becomes a philosophical question about whether you'd rather carry it or die. The musket over your shoulder, which seemed reasonably manageable in training, now feels like it's made of lead. Your bayonet clanks against your hip with every step, creating a rhythm that will haunt your dreams, assuming you ever get to sleep again. The pace is relentless. Napoleon's armies move fast, which is one of their advantages, but it's not an advantage for you. You're just the one doing the moving. The officers on horseback call out encouragement, which mostly consists of threats about what happens to stragglers. The sergeants walk alongside, watching for signs of collapse, despair, or the kind of creative thinking that leads to desertion. The drummers keep the rhythm, a steady beat that becomes the soundtrack to your suffering. Men start dropping after the first few hours. Not dying necessarily, just falling out of formation. Some collapse from exhaustion. Others claim illness. A few just stop walking and stare at the horizon with the kind of expression that suggests they've made peace with whatever consequences await them. The column keeps moving. In Napoleon's army, the march doesn't stop for individual tragedies. You pass through villages, or what's left of them. The inhabitants either flee or watch you pass with the kind of expression people reserve for natural disasters. Their fields are trampled, their fences dismantled for firewood, their livestock appropriated for the greater good of the empire. You try not to make eye contact. You're not personally responsible for any of this, but you're part of it, and that's uncomfortable enough. The countryside changes as you march. Sometimes it's relatively pleasant, rolling hills and decent weather. More often, it's hostile terrain that seems designed to make your life worse. Swamps that swallow wagons whole. Rivers that have to be forded in freezing water that reaches your chest. Mountains that require you to carry your equipment up slopes that would challenge a mountain goat. Forests where you can't see the sun and every tree looks like it's plotting against you. The weather is always wrong. If it's hot, it's unbearably hot, and you sweat through your uniform until it becomes a wearable swamp. If it's cold enough to kill you, and you shiver through the night wrapped in whatever you can find. If it's raining, it's the kind of rain that finds every gap in your clothing and makes you question the existence of a benevolent God. If it's snowing, well, that's when things get truly biblical. By evening, when the column finally stops, you're no longer the same person who started walking that morning. You're something else, something that exists primarily to put one foot in front of the other. Your legs are rubber. Your back is concrete. Your shoulders are convinced they've been removed and replaced with hot coals. You drop your pack and immediately collapse next to it. Not because you're tired, but because your body has simply decided it's done taking orders from your brain. The camp that springs up around you is organized chaos. Someone has to dig latrines, which is a job no one wants but everyone needs. Someone has to gather firewood, which means stripping the countryside of anything that will burn. Someone has to stand guard, which means staying awake when every fiber of your being is screaming for sleep. Someone has to tend to the sick and wounded, which means dealing with problems that would challenge trained doctors using equipment that would embarrass a medieval barber. Your tent, if you have one, is a miracle of engineering that involves more hope than physics. It's supposed to keep out rain, wind, and the general hostility of the universe. It succeeds at none of these things. Water finds its way in through holes you didn't know existed. Wind threatens to turn it into a sail and send you flying across the countryside. The ground beneath it is always the wrong shape, full of rocks that position themselves perfectly to stab you in the kidneys while you sleep. If you don't have a tent, you improvise. Maybe you and a few other men create a shelter using muskets as tent poles and whatever fabric you can salvage. Maybe you dig a hole and cover it with branches. Maybe you just lie down and hope for the best. Veterans develop a kind of sixth sense about finding the driest, most sheltered spot available. New recruits learn by sleeping in puddles and waking up with pneumonia. Dinner is whatever you can scavenge, barter, or steal. The official rations, when they exist, are distributed with the kind of mathematical precision that ensures everyone gets exactly enough to remain technically alive. You get bread that could be used as a weapon, meat that might once have been attached to an animal, and vegetables that have achieved a state of existence somewhere between rotten and pickled. You eat it all because this is dinner and there might not be another one tomorrow. Cooking is an art form when you have no real cooking equipment. You might have a small pot shared among several men. You might have a spoon if you're lucky. Fire is made from whatever will burn, which is often just about anything organic. Water comes from whatever source is available, which might be a clean spring, or might be the same stream the horses have been using as a toilet. You boil it anyway, because boiled water is probably safer than raw water, and probably is the best you can hope for. The evening meal becomes a social event, not because anyone particularly wants to socialize, but because sharing resources is the only way to survive. Men pool their rations, their cooking equipment, and their knowledge of which mushrooms won't kill you. Conversations range from complaints about the officers to speculation about where you're marching next to elaborate fantasies about what you'll do when this is all over. No one discusses the possibility that it might never be over. That's too depressing even for soldiers. As night falls, the real challenges begin. Sleep, when you can achieve it, is a form of unconsciousness that barely qualifies as rest. You're cold, wet, uncomfortable, and sleeping on ground that seems to have been designed by someone with a personal grudge against the human spine. Your uniform, which you wear to bed because it's the only clothes you have, is damp and smells like a combination of sweat, gunpowder, and regret. Your blanket, a generous term for whatever piece of cloth you've managed to acquire, provides the illusion of warmth without the reality. The sounds of the camp at night are a symphony of suffering. Men cough, groan, and mutter in their sleep. Someone is always awake, either on guard duty or because their wounds won't let them rest. Horses stamp and whinny. Equipment creaks and settles. Somewhere in the distance, an officer's arguing with another officer about something that will probably get you killed tomorrow. The wind carries the sound of other camps, other suffering, reminding you that you're just one small part of a vast machine of misery. You try to sleep, but your mind won't cooperate. You think about home, which is a mistake because it makes everything worse. You think about the battle that's coming, which is also a mistake because it makes everything worse. You think about desertion, which is tempting but practically impossible. You think about death, which is depressing but increasingly likely. Eventually, exhaustion wins, and you slip into something that might charitably be called sleep. Morning comes too soon, announced by the same dented horn or human scream that woke you yesterday. Your body has spent the night cataloging its complaints, and it presents them to you all at once. Everything hurts. Everything is stiff. Everything is wet. You drag yourself upright through sheer force of will, and the knowledge that staying down means being left behind. And being left behind means dying alone in a foreign country whose name you can't pronounce. The routine begins again. Breakfast, inspection, marching. But now you're a day deeper into the campaign, a day further from home, a day closer to whatever fate awaits you. The man next to you might be different from yesterday. Men disappeared during the night, casualties of disease, desertion, or simple despair. New faces appear in the ranks, replacements sent from distant depots to fill the gaps in the formation. You don't learn their names. There's no point. They might not be here tomorrow either. The march continues, day after day, week after week. You cross rivers that shouldn't exist, climb mountains that seem designed to break your spirit, and trudge through valleys that collect misery like rainwater. Your equipment deteriorates. Your uniform becomes more patch than original fabric. Your boots develop holes in strategic locations that let in water, mud, and small stones. Your musket shows signs of rust despite your best efforts to maintain it. Your bayonet develops a wobble that suggests it might not be reliable when you need it most. The landscape changes, but the suffering remains constant. You march through German forests where the trees seem to press in on you with malevolent intent. You cross Hungarian plains where the wind carries the scent of distant battles. You trudge through Italian valleys where the sun beats down with the intensity of a personal vendetta. You navigate Polish swamps where the mud reaches your knees, and every step requires a conscious decision to continue living. The weather continues to be your enemy. Rain turns roads into rivers and rivers into torrents. Snow makes every step treacherous and every breath a struggle. Heat exhausts you before you've covered a mile. Cold numbs your extremities until you're not sure if you still have all your fingers and toes. Wind drives dust into your eyes, sand into your mouth, and despair into your soul. Your health, never exactly robust, begins to deteriorate in ways that would concern you if you had the energy to be concerned. Your teeth, already loose from malnutrition, become more decorative than functional. Your vision, compromised by poor lighting and constant strain, makes distant objects a matter of guesswork. Your hearing, damaged by musket fire and artillery, turns conversations into lip-reading exercises. Your joints, stressed by constant marching and inadequate nutrition, protest every movement with the kind of pain that suggests they're filing for early retirement. The medical care available would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. The regimental surgeon, when you can find him, is usually a man whose medical training consists of a few months watching other people die, and a firm belief that most problems can be solved with a saw. His equipment consists of instruments that look like they were designed for carpentry rather than medicine. His medical supplies are whatever he can scavenge from the battlefield, which is usually just more of the same cloth that's been doing duty as bandages, tourniquets, and occasionally burial shrouds. Disease spreads through the army like gossip through a small town. Dysentery turns your digestive system into a weapon of mass destruction. Typhus makes you feverish and delirious. Pneumonia fills your lungs with fluid and your dreams with drowning. Scurvy makes your teeth fall out and your wounds refuse to heal. Frostbite claims fingers and toes with the casual efficiency of a debt collector. The surgeon's response to most of these conditions is amputation, which solves the immediate problem while creating several new ones. You learn to treat yourself, using knowledge passed down from veteran to veteran like folk remedies. Willow bark for pain, if you can find it. Moss for bandages, if it's clean. Alcohol for disinfection, if you can resist drinking it. Salt for preserving wounds, if you can spare it from your food. Prayer for everything else, though the effectiveness of this treatment is disputed. The psychological toll is harder to measure, but impossible to ignore. You've seen things that will haunt you for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. You've witnessed courage and cowardice, sometimes in the same person within the same hour. You've watched men die in ways that would give nightmares to nightmares. You've participated in actions that seemed necessary at the time, but feel questionable in retrospect. You've made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost lives, and you're not always sure which was which. The camaraderie among the men is both your salvation and your curse. These are the only people who understand what you're going through, but they're also the only people who might not be there tomorrow. You form bonds stronger than brotherhood, then watch helplessly as those bonds are severed by bullets, disease, or the simple mathematics of warfare. You learn to care deeply while preparing to let go, to invest emotionally while expecting loss. The officers, mounted on horses that eat better than you do, maintain their authority through a combination of tradition, fear, and the occasional inspiring speech. They're supposed to be your leaders, but they're also your judges, your executioners, and your connection to the vast political machine that put you here. Some of them are competent, some are incompetent, and some are actively dangerous. You learn to read their moods like weather patterns because your survival might depend on knowing when to volunteer and when to become invisible. The chain of command extends upward through layers of bureaucracy that would impress a medieval monastery. Your sergeant reports to a lieutenant, who reports to a captain, who reports to a colonel, who reports to a general, who reports to someone who might actually know what Napoleon is thinking. Information travels up this chain, but it becomes distorted at each level, like a message in a children's game. Orders travel down the chain, but they become increasingly disconnected from reality as they reach the bottom. Napoleon himself is a figure of myth and legend who occasionally appears on the horizon like a distant storm. He's supposedly a military genius, and the evidence suggests this is true, but geniuses are not necessarily comfortable people to work for. His strategies are brilliant, but they require you to march farther, fight harder, and suffer more than seems humanly possible. His vision extends across continents, but it includes your death as an acceptable cost of doing business. The battles, when they come, are both terrifying and anticlimactic. You've been marching toward them for weeks, dreading and anticipating them in equal measure. The preparation is elaborate, involving formations that look impressive on paper, but dissolve into chaos the moment someone starts shooting. You take your position in a line of men who are just as scared as you are, holding a musket that might fire accurately if you're lucky and might explode in your hands if you're not. The musket itself is a masterpiece of 18th century engineering that would be impressive if it weren't trying to kill you. It's heavy, unwieldy, and prone to misfiring at the worst possible moments. Loading it requires a complex sequence of movements that must be performed under stress while people are shooting at you. The ammunition is unreliable, the powder is often damp, and the whole system requires a level of coordination that assumes you're not terrified, exhausted, and possibly dying. The enemy, when you can see them, look remarkably similar to you. They're wearing different uniforms, but they have the same expression of desperate determination mixed with barely controlled panic. They're carrying similar weapons, marching in similar formations, and probably wondering how they ended up in this situation. For a brief moment, you might feel a sense of kinship with them, but that feeling disappears the moment they start shooting at you. The sound of battle is nothing like what you expected. There's no musical accompaniment, no dramatic dialogue, no inspiring speeches. Instead, there's a constant roar of musket fire, punctuated by the thunder of artillery and the screams of wounded men. The smoke from gunpowder creates a fog that makes it impossible to see more than a few yards in any direction. The smell of sulfur, blood, and fear creates an atmosphere that would challenge the strongest stomach. Your training, such as it was, focused on individual skills that prove largely irrelevant in the chaos of actual combat. You learn to load and fire your musket in sequence, but in battle, you're shooting at shadows through smoke while someone tries to stab you with a bayonet. You learn to march in formation, but formations break down the moment people start dying. You learn to follow orders, but orders become impossible to hear over the noise of battle. The reality of combat is that you spend most of your time not knowing what's happening. You fire your musket at shapes in the smoke. You reload as quickly as possible, which is not very quickly when your hands are shaking and your equipment is malfunctioning. You try to stay close to the men around you, but men around you keep disappearing, either because they've been killed or because they've decided discretion is the better part of valor and have relocated to somewhere safer. The casualties are immediate and horrific. Musket balls don't create clean wounds. They shatter bones and tear flesh in ways that defy medical treatment. Artillery does worse, turning human beings into abstract art. The wounded scream for help that might not come. The dead lie where they fall, becoming obstacles for the living to step over or around. The smell of blood and gunpowder is joined by less pleasant odors that suggest the human body has limits on what it can endure. You try to be brave, but bravery is a luxury you can't afford. Instead, you focus on survival, which means following orders, staying with your unit, and not thinking too hard about what you're doing. You fire when told to fire, advance when told to advance, and retreat when told to retreat. You try not to look too closely at the faces of the men you're shooting at, and you try not to think about the faces of the men who are shooting at you. The officers, still mounted on their horses, ride back and forth behind the lines, shouting orders that may or may not be relevant to your current situation. They're supposed to be providing leadership, but mostly they're trying to impose order on chaos, which is like trying to organize a hurricane. Some of them are competent, some are incompetent, and some are so far removed from reality that they might as well be commanding from another planet. The battle continues for hours, or maybe minutes. Time becomes elastic when you're being shot at. Every second feels like an eternity, but somehow the day passes in a blur of noise, smoke, and terror. You fire and reload, until your shoulder is bruised from the musket's recoil, and your ears are ringing from the constant noise. Your water runs out, your powder gets low, and your sense of reality starts to slip. Eventually, someone wins. It might be you, or it might be the enemy, but victory is a relative concept when you're standing in a field full of corpses. If you've won, you're expected to cheer, but cheering requires energy you don't have. If you've lost, you're expected to retreat in good order. But good order is a concept that lost meaning about 3 hours ago. Either way, you're still alive, which is more than you expected when the day started. The aftermath is worse than the battle. The dead must be buried, the wounded must be treated, and the living must be reorganized into something resembling a military unit. You help carry the wounded to the makeshift hospitals, where the surgeons work with the desperate efficiency of men who know they can't save everyone. You help dig graves for the dead, shallow holes that will have to do because there's no time for proper burials. You help collect the equipment scattered across the battlefield, muskets and bayonets and pieces of uniform that might be useful if you can clean the blood off them. The casualty lists are read aloud, names of men who won't be marching tomorrow. Some of them you knew well, others you barely recognized, but all of them were part of your world, and now they're not. Their personal effects are gathered and, theoretically, sent back to their families, but the reality is that most of it will be redistributed among the survivors. Their letters from home become kindling. Their spare clothing becomes bandages. Their weapons become replacements for the ones that were lost or broken. You try to process what you've experienced, but processing requires mental resources you don't have. Instead, you focus on the immediate necessities: cleaning your musket, finding something to eat, and locating a place to sleep. Tomorrow there will be another march, and the day after that there might be another battle. The war continues regardless of your personal trauma, and you're expected to continue with it. The letters you write home, when you can find paper and ink, become exercises in creative fiction. You can't tell your family about the reality of what you're experiencing, partly because they wouldn't understand, and partly because the censors wouldn't allow it. Instead, you write about the weather, the countryside, and the camaraderie among the men. You mention that you're well, which is true in the sense that you're not dead yet. You ask about home, but you're not sure you want to know the answer. The seasons change, but the campaign continues. Summer brings heat that makes marching a form of torture. Autumn brings rain that turns roads into rivers and rivers into torrents. Winter brings cold that kills as efficiently as any enemy. Spring brings mud that swallows entire wagons, and hope that maybe this year will be different. It never is. Your uniform, which started as a symbol of revolutionary ideals and national pride, becomes a collection of patches and repairs that tells the story of your journey. The blue fabric fades to gray, then to brown. then to whatever color dirt and blood and sweat create when mixed together. The brass buttons tarnish and fall off, replaced by buttons made from bone or wood or whatever you can scavenge. The white crossbelts become brown crossbelts, then black crossbelts, then just straps that hold your equipment together. Your equipment degrades at the same rate as your uniform. Your musket's barrel becomes pitted with rust despite your best efforts to maintain it. Your bayonet develops a wobble that suggests it might not be reliable when you need it most. Your pack develops holes that let in water and let out anything small enough to fall through. Your canteen starts to leak, your cartridge box loses its waterproofing, and your sword, if you have one, becomes more decorative than functional. The food situation, never good, becomes a daily exercise in creative scavenging. Official rations are distributed irregularly and in quantities that would barely sustain a child, let alone a grown man marching 20 miles a day. You learn to forage, which is a polite term for eating anything that might be edible. You learn to trade, bartering personal items for food with civilians who may or may not be friendly. You learn to steal, taking what you need from abandoned houses and empty fields, trying not to think about the families who might be depending on those resources. The bread, when available, could be used as construction material. The meat, when it appears, is usually salted to the point of toxicity, and may have been dead for longer than you've been alive. The vegetables are whatever can be found growing wild or stored in root cellars. The water is whatever you can find, boiled when possible, filtered through cloth when necessary, and consumed with a prayer to whatever gods protect men who have no choice but to drink from questionable sources. Your health continues to deteriorate in ways that would concern you if you had the luxury of being concerned. Your teeth, already loose from malnutrition, become more decorative than functional. Your vision, compromised by poor lighting and constant strain, makes distant objects a matter of guesswork. Your hearing, damaged by musket fire and artillery, turns conversations into lip-reading exercises. Your joints, stressed by constant marching and inadequate nutrition, protest every movement with the kind of pain that suggests they're filing for early retirement. The medical care available would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. The regimental surgeon, when you can find him, is usually a man whose medical training consists of a few months watching other people die and a firm belief that most problems can be solved with a saw. His equipment consists of instruments that look like they were designed for carpentry rather than medicine. His medical supplies are whatever he can scavenge from the battlefield, which is usually just more of the same cloth that's been doing duty as bandages, tourniquets, and occasionally burial shrouds. Disease spreads through the army like rumors through a small town. Dysentery turns your digestive system into a weapon of mass destruction. Typhus makes you feverish and delirious. Pneumonia fills your lungs with fluid and your dreams with drowning. Scurvy makes your teeth fall out and your wounds refuse to heal. Frostbite claims fingers and toes with the casual efficiency of a debt collector. The surgeon's response to most of these conditions is amputation, which solves the immediate problem while creating several new ones. You learn to treat yourself, using knowledge passed down from veteran to veteran like folk remedies. Willow bark for pain, if you can find it. Moss for bandages, if it's clean. Alcohol for disinfection, if you can resist drinking it. Salt for preserving wounds, if you can spare it from your food. Prayer for everything else, though the effectiveness of this treatment is disputed. The psychological toll is harder to measure but impossible to ignore. You've seen things that will haunt you for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. You've witnessed courage and cowardice, sometimes in the same person within the same hour. You've watched men die in ways that would give nightmares to nightmares. You've participated in actions that seemed necessary at the time, but feel questionable in retrospect. you've made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost lives, and you're not always sure which was which. The camaraderie among the men is both your salvation and your curse. These are the only people who understand what you're going through. But they're also the only people who might not be there tomorrow. You form bonds stronger than brotherhood, then watch helplessly as those bonds are severed by bullets, disease, or the simple mathematics of warfare. You learn to care deeply while preparing to let go, to invest emotionally while expecting loss. The mail, when it arrives, is a cruel reminder of the world you've left behind. Letters from home describe a life that seems increasingly foreign to you. Your family writes about harvests and weather and local gossip, while you're living in a world of constant danger and suffering. They ask when you're coming home, but you don't know if you're coming home. They tell you they're proud of you, but you're not sure there's anything to be proud of. Writing letters home becomes an exercise in creative fiction. You can't tell your family about the reality of what you're experiencing, partly because they wouldn't understand, and partly because the censors wouldn't allow it. Instead, you write about the weather, the countryside, and the camaraderie among the men. You mention that you're well, which is true in the sense that you're not dead yet. You ask about home, but you're not sure you want to know the answer. The pay, when it comes, is usually insufficient and often late. The army runs on credit, borrowing against future victories that may or may not materialize. Your wages are paid in currency that might not be accepted by the time you get a chance to spend it. The sutlers who follow the army and sell necessities at inflated prices take most of your money in exchange for items that should be provided by the army but aren't. A bar of soap costs a day's wages. A decent pair of boots costs a month's wages. A bottle of wine costs your soul, but you buy it anyway because sometimes oblivion is worth the price. The hierarchy of suffering in Napoleon's army is strictly maintained. At the bottom are the common soldiers, like yourself, who do the dying. Above you are the corporals, who do the yelling. Above them are the sergeants, who do the threatening. Above them are the officers, who do the decision-making from horseback. At the top is Napoleon himself, who does the empire building while you do the bleeding. Your daily routine, when you're not marching or fighting, follows a pattern that would drive a monastery monk to despair. You wake before dawn to the sound of drums or bugles, or whatever passes for reveille in your particular corner of hell. You stumble to your feet, check that you still have all your essential body parts, and begin the morning ritual of trying to make yourself presentable for another day of organized suffering. The morning inspection is a theater of the absurd. Your sergeant, a man whose face suggests he's been personally insulted by every country in Europe, walks down the line examining each soldier like a horse dealer evaluating livestock. He's looking for signs of illness, desertion, or the kind of creative thinking that leads to mutiny. Your musket must be clean, which is impossible given the conditions. Your uniform must be neat, which is laughable.